Hello, and welcome to the Charles River Conservancy Parkland Show. My name is Renata von Tscharner. I'm the president and founder of the Charles River Conservancy. And our mission is to make the parklands, the urban parklands from the harbor up to the Watertown Dam, more active, attractive, and accessible for all. So in this program, we talk about the volunteer program, about swimming, the skate park, biking, but art is actually also part of the mission of the Conservancy to bring art and cultural enrichment to the parklands. So I'm particularly delighted that tonight we have two public artists that are well known to Cambridge and they know the river well, to welcome them here. Welcome Max Harries.
Hello.
And Lajos Heder. Welcome.
Hello.
And you probably might not have met them, but you definitely have met their art in Porter Square. They did the piece that was part of the Arts on the Line in '84. They also did the piece at the waterworks on Fresh Pond, which was part of the city's 1%. So you've seen their work, and they have done, among their many, many works over the last 20 years, quite a few about rivers. And one in particular, or two about them, about the Charles River. So we will be looking at various projects of rivers, of how they interpret the river, how they saw ways to enrich the river, and we hope that eventually we will be able to do something on the Charles River again, because this river lends itself very well for public art, and so I hope that will be an inspiration as we move forward.
Yes.
So let's start with a river, the Bronx River, the Golden Ball in the Bronx River. So do you want to start, Max, with kind of giving us a bit of an outline of what we're seeing here?
The National Park Service asked Lash and myself to come and do this project on the Bronx River. As you see from this image, the Bronx River is sandwiched or braided between the highway and the trains, and it's been neglected, and so they wanted us to create visibility for the river. And so it went from Westchester County, which is a very rich county, to Hunts Point, which is a poor immigrant community, and so we had to bridge between the two.
And so this is a movie that you shot of the event on the river.
Yes, this will be narrated by different people.
And is the river a swimmable river right now?
Well, one of the fascinating
I swam in it,
demographic
but it wasn't planned.
factors is that the Bronx River ties together some of the most affluent communities in the country with some of the most distressed communities in this country. And they share this river, be it upstream, downstream. It is their river together. And we hope that the Gold Ball will be a unifying force and that it has some incredible resources. The Bronx Zoo is one of the great features on the river, and the Bronx Botanical Gardens are along the river. And then there's some abandoned cement factories and some very difficult environments as well in the lower portion of the river, which we hope will be going through a substantial greening process.
About 27 communities were part of this. Took a year to organize. First year there were only 3 boats. Second year there was 20, and now it's still going on.
And it goes every year, the ball goes down?
I think the expectation that the Golden Ball
Ball went 3 times.
it's almost like a punctuation in the day. it wasn't that this was the only event that was happening, but at some point it would come along, and it seemed to be the rallying chorus for the river that the kids really got excited. They went along the river with us. They made music or noise, or certainly the cheering and the kind of energy that was directed towards us was really just phenomenal. But it was really, yes, of
Those
course,
dancers were
that's
part
what
of the
it
event.
was.
We brought them in.
They danced 10 miles.
They were painted in gold, they were dressed in gold.
Yeah.
Called the Arthur Villas Dance Company.
Well, this is a wonderful opening for this celebration because it's both a piece of art, visually very
But
intriguing.
But what's really significant about it, it was apparently the catalyst to bring the community together. And since that time, you can see, if you go to this image, this was the place we landed, but at this event, for the first time, they opened up the razor wire and the fence and had access to the river in over 50 years. And now this site has become a park. This is Governor Pataki on the river. He gave money for it, and you go to the next image.
All right, and here's a portage.
And this
Yeah.
is the park now, and
Oh,
they have a boating program. And if you go to the next one, every year they have a flotilla of canoes coming down the river. The park has now got amphitheater, places to be, places to cool.
Wow.
So it's the first of 7 parks that happened on the Bronx River.
Yeah. So it wasn't just an event or a piece of public art. It really triggered a whole new rejuvenation of the park.
That's what they have written and told us, and I think that's fabulous for us.
Yeah. Well, that's an extraordinary project, and if people go to your website, and we'll give you a website later, they can find out more information about this Bronx River project.
Yes.
Yeah,
indeed.
wonderful. Well, we're going to move on to the next project, which is a local project, the Remembering the River. Lajos, do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was done by Mags and our students, so maybe we should
all right. Well, I
pass
better
it on
ask
to
Max because he also
Yes.
teaches at the Museum of Fine Arts.
Yeah,
All
at
right.
the museum school.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a project. The Muddy River is in Brookline. It has flooded many times. It's culverted under the highway. There's Sears Roebuck is there, which they took over some of the park. The Emerald Necklace to create parking. So this is a statement by my students where they hauled the water from one side of the river and walked across with buckets and reeds.
And you know the wonderful. I bicycled by there earlier today, and it's now being daylighted. What used to be a
Yes.
parking lot
Yeah.
is opened up. The river. The culverts are going to be opened up. The Muddy River will see the sunshine again. So in a way, what you did has become a reality. So that is very exciting.
Yeah, well, it's on the other side, and the next one you can see them carrying, and then they throw it into the river on the other side. So, I mean, it's an action. Did it have consequence? I don't know, but certainly it's great to see it's going to be daylighted.
Yeah, well, it created awareness, and I think that's often, somebody once said, that's a definition of art, that it changes perception.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many of your works really do change perception, and you fulfill an important role, and I hope that you can play a role like that on the Charles River, because we need to see our river in a different light, to appreciate it in a new way. So let's look at the next project. here, before we move on to the next project, just this last, here they have the water carried over the parking lot.
Yeah, and
And,
throwing it in the other side.
Yeah. All right. Well, Lajos, will you tell us about the river ruins?
Okay, I'll tell a little bit, then Max will have to help me, because again, this was something she did in Art Park in
All right.
Atlantic City. But this is a river that feeds Niagara Falls, and it's a river with lots of problems, including much pollution. And this was a temporary installation, and it was again about perceiving the things about the river. And as I understand, the piece consisted of a series of stations from which you could watch the river, but you could also see specific installations which were relatively small, and they only showed up in the viewers, which were a kind of trail along the river.
And there were quotations on the viewers that put that into perspective. These two little girls are looking through the viewers at a piece in the trees, and if you go to the next image, there's a glass with "drink me" on it. And what they have on the viewers is, and the wise little Alice wasn't going to do that in a hurry. But this site is actually a site by Love Canal. It's a park made on a toxic waste site. So this is a kind of reminder that this isn't a bucolic place. This place has history.
Yes, and here is another image of somebody looking out.
And then he's looking at an image of fish, and on the viewer it says, "Don't blame the fish." So, these were quotations. That was anonymous, but there were lots of Shakespearean or Thoreau quotations that were on these different viewers.
Yeah.
And this was a Thoreau quotation, whether it be a dream to go to the lake to get a pail of water. Now, this was done so long ago, and it's a question now, too. Would you drink the water in the lake?
Or the Charles River,
Yeah.
yes. Well, we had some viewing stations on the Charles, and in this box were swimming structures from Switzerland. And so it was kind of, could you imagine swimming structures like that on the Charles?
Yeah.
And I think the perceptions on the Charles are often, well, you can't swim here. And probably the same with many rivers. We have to change the perception that we have now cleaned up the river. We're getting ready to swim in the river. So I think this is definitely a way to change the perception of a river. And you have, I think, one more image of here.
And this is a Shakespearean quote about the king and the pauper eat the same fish. Now, I can't remember the exact quote, but so it's true. I mean, it affects you whether you're poor or rich if you contaminate the rivers.
It affects everybody. Yes. Yeah.
So.
Well, I think interpreting what you see and focusing people's attention is a good way of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So let's move on to the next project, which is about the Charles River.
Well, we were asked to do a piece for the River Festival, and it has always bothered us that you go there and you have pretzel stands and crafts, and actually that river is only that one point they only see one point. But in fact, what we did here, the river is 78.5 miles long, or 0.4 miles long. So we got strings and basically enough that is the length of the river, created these needle points which are 10 feet high, and wound down the river. And it actually took longer to wind down the river than the length of the river. It took 89 hours.
And the river is 80 miles, so it's an hour per mile.
Yeah, it's slower than walking.
Slower than walking.
Maybe
yes,
my
yes.
swimming ability. Now, what people did was to write down their thoughts or memories on the river, and then in the next one you see them tying these onto the string, which then gets bound into the ball.
Wonderful way. Memories of rivers. You probably are familiar with our publications, River Stories, where people tell stories. And I think that's how the river comes alive, by telling stories about it. And so each inch here represents an inch of the river.
Well, yes, I don't remember how long each spool was, but you can see there's markers, there's a circular thing there that tells you what town it's gone through.
Yeah.
So.
And we are using up all the spools here.
Yeah.
I remember that event on the River Festival. It's such an appropriate piece for the River Fest.
Because it went on 24 hours a day, so it went on through the night and to the day, and all the strange people that showed up at 3 o'clock in the morning came in, they participated.
Different memories.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
and then I remember seeing that ball at the Museum of Science. They actually displayed it for a while.
Yes, they did. In between the river festivals, now the ball is much bigger, weighs 550 pounds. And an impossible object.
Yes, yeah.
But it was really neat. There it is as its length of the river, but it was really neat to spend time on the river through the night and watching the light and the activity.
Yeah.
And the boats coming out and the cars starting up. It was a magical experience to do it.
Yeah, the river at night is very magical, as many people who go to river seeing experience. It's a beautiful place at night. Now here the ball is in front of an exhibit about the river. Do you want to tell us more about that exhibit of how that?
Yeah, that exhibit was at the School of Noble and Greenough, and it's about for students to kind of explore and realize their relationship to the river, because the school is on the Charles River upstream.
Yeah.
And so all those houses you see in the background had to do with where people lived and what their relationships and their stories about the river were.
So these were where the students live in relation to the river. Yeah.
And some of those photographs and things were the students' work when they about their capturing what the river was to them.
And we tied it into their curriculum, so it was tied into the English department composition, and it was tied into their photo department. And so it was really a kind of a wonderful event. And I don't think any of the students ever realized that river, we call it our river, our Charles. So, that is the thread that holds them all together.
Yeah.
And you can see on that map that the Charles sort of winds around in an impossible way, so people don't really quite understand how one part connects to the other.
No, and often you don't see it. You might drive, but you lose the sight. You only see it, the body of the river really at the basin, where before it goes into the harbor, or you might see it at the Lake District, which is at the top of the picture. But of course, when you start running in Hopkinton, you run 26 miles, but the fish, they swim 80 miles. Right. So that's the part that you see here. And then each of the images shows where the student lives.
Yeah, and it's a Google map of where they live, and the red dots are other students who possibly didn't participate. So it was. And
the bottles are samples.
And they gathered the water
at their houses.
Very nice,
yeah,
very nice.
From the river.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they now see the river in a very different light.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, now we have another movie here.
Now, what's particular about this is just one bucket of water, and you will see.
And it was displayed at the Cambridge Arts Council for the first time, and in some other places as well.
And we see the light shining through the water. Is that what?
That's what
right.
you see.
You can see it's hung from that ladder, and it shines through the water, and then you see the shadow, the sort of imprint of it on the ground, which is where the river really is this reflection, this illusion. You see that below.
And then you recycle the water, and
Yeah,
it's
the water
a continuous band.
keeps
Yeah.
circulating through,
Yeah.
exactly.
But it's just one bucket's worth.
One bucket full of water, but it's powerful because it's the reflection captures your
Right.
attention.
Well, that's the thing, is water and light really go well together.
Yeah. And is that just a reflection you step over?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, what is, in many ways, water is like fire. You can watch it, and it never gets boring.
Yeah.
It's constantly alive,
Sure.
and that's imagined you to use that power for a piece. So I hope eventually we can do something with the water power, but because the Charles is a navigable river, so we have to take that into account. And also the water is not always ready to be touched by humans, because sometimes it has algae in it, but that's getting better. So we have to find ways to overcome all these obstacles so it could become part of an art piece. But I hope you keep thinking of how the Charles River could be the subject or the object of a piece of art.
Yeah, it's in our hometown, so
You live in Porter
definitely.
Square. You have your studio there. Exactly.
Yeah.
We have another piece here, which is a very whimsical piece, which is in China. Do you want to tell us about this piece in China?
Well, we were invited to participate in this international sculpture exhibit in a wetlands park in the city of Hangzhou. And we decided, because it was a wetlands park, we should do something really light and based on light and floating and somewhat moving. So we had this designed, and we went there to conceive of the thing, had it accepted, and then had it fabricated over there. And then we went back to install it.
And
But when we went, it was the rainy season,
Right.
so we always had an umbrella.
Oh,
and when
that-
the rain stopped, you needed an umbrella because the heat was so intense. So, yeah.
And are these umbrellas? Was that a permanent or a temporary installation?
Both. They called it a temporary installation and was supposed to last forever. This must be a Chinese concept. We didn't fully get it, but it will last for a while. The light comes from this refractive optical lens that comes in sheets, basically, which is sandwiched between two layers of acrylic. So you can see, and there's some others you can see too, the way the light gets reflected and moved around and so on with the water, but also, and it's also, of course, it's floating, so it's reflecting in the water itself. So these things were, and then a gentle movement.
And are they stable, or do they move around?
They move around, and a little wind moves them slightly, or a current. And also the water there, what's great about having them float is the water is never constant. So it's high and low, so these go up and down too.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they're tethered to one location, but they can move around within
They
that.
can move around, yes.
And there's a lot of people who came to see it. This was
Yeah.
a pretty busy place from the around, for the perimeter.
Yeah, and I think what all your pieces that we've seen, and I know from your other work, what they all are is what I call placemakers. You always kind of start with the location of what does the location want? What's the story about it? And I think that what makes your public art so powerful. You don't just have an idea of a form and then you impose it on a place. You first start by listening to the place.
Yeah, and actually, subconsciously, we must have known that this was one of the bigger umbrella fabrication areas in China. So, it really, people were really moved by these, and it was just an incredible experience to do them.
Yeah.
But Renata, you're really right, because none of our pieces are just sort of there for you to stand in one place and just look. It's almost always to involve people. Most of the pieces, not particularly this one, you can actually enter into the piece, and the piece provides you with a particular point of view, a place from which you experience things. In this case, you mostly experience the umbrellas, but they still also experience the water and the reflections and all of that, and you can see it from different points of view.
And it's also an umbrella is a beautiful shape, and then when you also have the water and the light play with it, it really becomes quite magical. I can imagine the people starting to tell stories about these umbrellas.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, it's interesting how much the umbrella comes into Chinese painting. So actually bringing it into sculpture was a whole new kind of thought.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, there has just been a glimpse of some of your work, and I'm very grateful that you shared that with us. And in case you just joined us and you missed it, you can go to YouTube in a few days and see that film, and also go to their website, and I'll show that later, to show many works, because you've worked with water in other places as well.
Yeah.
You have done some very dramatic pieces of falling water, and so water has been an important part of your efforts.
Yeah, it's such a dynamic material. And not only that, I mean, rivers are magical and we like working with them.
Yeah. I grew up on a big river, so
What river did you grow up on?
the Danube,
The Danube,
Yes.
yes.
swimming in spite of the pollution all summer long. But,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so we've the Charles River Conservancy already had conversations with the Cambridge Arts Council, so we hope that eventually we will be able to do something on the river, along the river, because it's a way of enjoying the river, of seeing the river differently. And thank you for sharing your views about the river. And I'm going to put up your website now, so that people can find you on the internet. And thank you for coming today, and for sharing your ideas and your visuals. That was really a great pleasure.
It was a pleasure for us.
but thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.